studies, not just one. You're looking where they are being published and comparing them to other things that are similar, then you're doing the right thing. So if you want to talk about the particular product, I'd be happy to at some point. But so, I mean, again, and that's what I do. I help people look at different products, but most of the time the marketing edge part comes in, and it's more about making money. Just like, I'm not saying what you're saying, which product you're talking about, but most of the time, I mean, just think of the eras that we've been through. Low carbs. And that's really bad for athletes. But what happens is you lean out in the beginning, because in the beginning, your body goes into protective mode. It's called ketosis. So what happens is, at that point, we're not really burning fat yet because the body's protecting itself. But that part of the leaning is so short. Once it gets beyond that, it becomes very dangerous. So an athlete's going to defend that they feel great and everything, but that lasts literally a week or so. You know, and so you hear all this defense and you think, oh, that's a great way to lean out. Yeah, there's science to the reason why you lose weight on high protein. But for an athlete, is that a good idea? You know, ultimately you're going to get kidney stones and having your gallbladder removed. So think of all the eras we've been through, low fat, low carbs. Now, there's something to fat loading, just like there is to carb loading. But again, it's that whole putting your body under something different one time every 6 weeks to 3 months. Fat loading works. It's not going to work every time. So it's the same type of thing. It will work one time because it's something the body's like, oh, what's going on here? And it kind of responds to protect itself. So it feels great the first time, but do it consistently and you'll feel terrible.
And on the point on that, I've been probably since October I started like kind of eliminating. I don't like completely shut out carbs. That's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, the one thing that you said about carbs, like near the beginning, that I didn't really realize was that you need them to actually produce muscle, and you need them to not lose muscle.
You need them to spare your muscle.
Right.
It's more important than producing muscle, especially you sprinting guys.
Right.
Sparing your muscle. Because sprinters don't need to build muscle. They can maintain muscle. But if you start losing your muscle, you're going to lose your performance. And the whole weight to ratio concept as well comes into play. You start losing muscle, you start losing strength and performance, but the right amount of muscle, and especially for sprinters without building, you've got the right amount of strength as well as carrying a smaller body quicker. A smaller body can go faster. I always say leaner, faster. So, how are we doing? Okay.
Can I ask you one question? You mentioned your carb loading process. Do you recommend a decarb phase or?
You know what, a decarb phase has gotten a bad rap in research lately. However, what I do, because it's got a bad rap, I started doing my own little investigations, so I kind of take it into a middle of the road. So when I talk about doing a whole week of carb loading, the first couple of days are lower carbs, but not zero carbs. And you don't go through that whole, you don't go into, what were they used to call it? I can't remember the word on the top of my head, but they starve themselves basically so that they can start packing glycogen later on in the week. But what I do is I work on a couple of days of lower carbs, higher protein, a couple of moderate days, and then a couple of eliminate all the protein, fat, fiber, everything, just float up on carbs for 2 days. That's what my carb loading phase is. But I work with athletes individually on that. Again, it's going to depend on your intensity, the distance of your race, how you'll do your carbs. Some people don't need to do a whole phase of carb loading. They can just focus on the last 2 days. And typically for sprinters, you focus on the last 2 days. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So, just keep telling me when time's up. But some of the other things I've written down, electrolyte balance. A lot of times athletes get cramps. What does everyone else around you telling you? Oh, you need potassium. Right? How many times have you heard that? Your body can actually metabolize potassium at a very, very fine level. It's the one thing in the body that's actually really good, unless it's some type of metabolic disorder or something. So you do not want to load on potassium, because what happens is, there may be potassium, but we don't know. So if somebody says, I'm getting cramps, it's not necessarily potassium. Potassium and sodium work opposite each other, and they are what regulates the water balance in the cells. Remember, sodium actually attracts water. So if sodium is high enough to help you hydrate and be hydrated, then your potassium could go off, but not necessarily. If you load up on the potassium, you may actually be causing a misbalance in your sodium, and that could be causing cramps. So for those of you that get cramps and start loading up on the potassium, you might actually be making it worse. Some of you may be making it better, but you don't know that. So that's a good time maybe to seek professional help if you struggle with cramps. Instead of just saying more bananas and more potassium tablets, that's probably very, very dangerous.
Well, on one note on that, I'll hear it, talk to the triathletes that are really increasing their electrolyte intake. You'll say, I was cramping up on the swim. You're not depleted on the swim.
Yeah.
What's happening is your muscles are cramping because they're being asked to do what they're not ready to do.
Yeah.
And in open water, you may be kicking harder, your stroke is changing, you're working harder on the race day.
Because of the athletes
intensity.
you. Yeah.
Cramping is not always caused by an electrolyte imbalance.
And then loading up on the electrolytes could be the worst thing that you could do, because it's going to start offsetting your hydration balance to be incorrect. So electrolytes is also another thing we look for in with, seeking out professional help. So if you struggle with cramps, it's something maybe nutritionally related, and again, note where it's happening. So if you do struggle with cramps, always log what you're doing. Log what's your nutrition strategy? Did you stick to it? Did you have a strategy? Did you make a strategy while you were training? Because that's really important. A lot of times if you ask somebody what they do on race day, come into my office, what's your training, what's your nutrition strategy? I go, what are you talking about? You should have a strategy when you go into a race. You might go off your strategy because you landed up getting sick or something, or you did cramp on the swim. But electrolyte balance comes in with temperature and how much you sweat and what your sweat rate is. And remember, sodium is the one thing that helps you control your hydration levels. So you've got to be very careful of hydrating when you're eating sodium, because if you don't, you can get, I'm sure as athletes hyper and hyponatremia are the two very dangerous conditions to have. In fact, the highest death rate of ultra-endurance sports is hyponatremia, where you have too much water, and if you're having too much water and not enough salt, you can dilute your salt levels to such a low extent that your heart won't beat, because your heart relies on sodium to beat. So again, be careful of not only drinking water. Now, again, most of you are short course, good thing we don't have to worry about that for the most part. But again, if you do struggle with cramps and stuff like that, it's a good time to seek out professional help. Because hyponatremia is the most dangerous situation. Now, hyper, luckily, is not as dangerous, but it can be very, very uncomfortable. In fact, I like to talk about, that's the reason why I do recreational racing, is because these things happen. And even as a sports dietitian, a few years ago, my very first long 70.3 race was my first ocean swim. And it was really hot, Gulf Coast, some of you may have done Gulf Coast, really hot. And I have a very hard time drinking water on the bike. It's not anything that I do really related. It's mechanics and bike skills. So I decided, I better take some electrolytes with me, because that helps maintain your hydration a little bit better. So never practiced it. I should have known better. I got into the ocean. It was very rough, very scary first 70.3 ocean swim. And when I got to the transition area, I thought, it's really, really hot. I better take some tabs. But I also swallowed half the ocean. What does the ocean have in it? Salt. Do you think taking salt in transition was a good idea? I actually got hyponatremia, and I hate to admit it because I'm a sports dietitian, but that was miserable. But luckily it's not as fatal as hyponatremia can be. Anything else? Anybody else?
Ranges of salt. Matt, I remember, was talking about athletes salting up to like 5 grams per hour, whereas if you're going to bother taking salt, it's normally like 500 milligrams, or pills, like 250 milligrams.
I've brought some with me.
So really wide range.
Yes, it's a wide range depending again on your sweat rate. If you're a heavy sweater as well as a electrolytic sweater, so like when you finish a race, do you see your black clothes turning white? Do you have salt on your face? Have you absolutely, so everybody's different. So the best thing to do is actually go see somebody, have a sweat rate test done, or they can give you a layman's way of doing a sweat rate test and determining if you're a salty sweater. And you can safely, depending on how much you sweat, but some athletes can safely do 2 to 4 grams an hour.
Yeah.
I was using Hunter Kemper as an example because they had him for Beijing. They had him on an extremely high salt.
And again, it depends on you. Remember I said in the beginning, some people have a hard time, you may be one of them, absorbing at the right rate that you need it, and that's a genetic thing. You're not going to be able to, you have to work on that. It's a genetic misfortune. But I know an athlete that almost died, of hypernatremia, and then came to see me. We ended up giving her, electrolytes. I can't believe the amount of electrolytes she takes, and it's the only time she doesn't cramp. But she does these the one in the desert, the 100-mile runs, the crazy bad water and that type of thing.
When you work with an athlete trying to determine, the salt content of their sweat or how many electrolytes to dose, I'm sure you have them do a sweat rate test and measure the electrolyte content of that. But then do you, over the next couple of weeks, say, hey, on your big training days?
Yeah, it's a little bit of trial and error no matter what.
Yeah.
Even if you do tests, it's trial and error.
Because that only tests at the conditions on the test.
Yeah.
You don't know how you're going to function at 90 degrees, but X amount of degrees.
And if you get used to doing the testing, do it under all conditions. If you one day out in Arizona or whatever, or one day out in Colorado where you're in the mountains, you just have to do it in all types. Whenever you're at a new type of altitude or heat or humidity, you can do yourself a test. You only need to spend an hour without drinking and monitoring how much sweat, how much your intake and loss was.
And on that note, you also have to think about body size.
Yeah, I was going to say it's definitely based on body size.
For whatever reason, I'm working with two triathletes that are both over 180 pounds. They are not going to perform as well in hot and humid conditions. They may think they will, but they're just, when you're a bigger person, you expend more heat.
You can tell when I'm mad. If you ever watch the Kona text like I was watching today, those big guys, and they're always wearing white. You'll never see one of those big guys wearing Kona.
Yeah.
I'll say not never say never, but but hardly ever. And they always wear full white because of how their body surface is what determines how quickly they can or cannot get rid of the heat.
My last question, once you get to the point of prescribing somebody roughly how many milligrams of salt, and it depends on the conditions, do you get as specific as getting into roughly this much sodium, this much potassium? Because I haven't seen salt pills that say, we have this percentage. Well, the percentages are listed on the back, but
they
it's not
are.
like
But
there's a
I
designer.
really would rather work with something that's already mixed, because potassium you don't really have to worry about at first until you're struggling. Then we look at the sodium-potassium balance, because 9 times out of 10 it's sodium, not potassium. But if you lacking sodium or over on potassium or over on potassium, you're changing your potassium, your sodium. They change each other. That's what I'm trying to say. So again, it's trial and error. So I can't really tell you how many milligrams of potassium to take or whatever.
No, I'm not looking for a
no, I'm
range.
just saying. I don't think anybody could.
Okay.
I don't think you could, but you can work on your sodium levels or the ones that are already pre-mixed. And they're usually sodium, potassium, magnesium, and chloride.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Ilana's a great resource for us, but she's also a business person, so please refer your athletes to her this season. If anybody has any nutritional issues, you say, I know a great source for you, Ilana Katz. She's helped a lot of Sport Factory athletes. She takes a lot of her time and helps out the team here, so we want to make sure to return that favor.
I do have cards if you want, and if you want to get my newsletter, I know you already get Sport Factory, but you're welcome to look me up and email me. I have my own website, but I post articles on both. In fact, I do it for quite a few people, not just, I actually I'm on Matt Fitzgerald's writing panel, in case some of you read Triathlete magazine and Runners World. I've got something coming out in Runners World in April, I believe they did an interview for me, but a lot of people, when I say my name, they go, oh yeah, I've never seen your name somewhere, and that rings a bell, and it's usually just a quote in Runners World or something. In fact, just one of my funny stories, one of my races, because I teach my athletes how to make potato gels. So especially if you don't want to eat all the too sugary stuff. So I teach my athletes how to make gels out of potato. And one time I was eating potato in a transition area, and somebody said, "Oh, you must work with Ilana." And I didn't know who it was. No, I don't know.
There's not too many potato gel people out there.
Actually, now there are. So I have a lot of clients. But yeah. So hopefully you got something out of it. And what's your next presentation?
Megan Deegan's going to roll.